Right now, without noticing it, you are standing somewhere in a line, not a line at a store, and not a line you can see. It is the line of every human being who has ever lived, arranged in the order they were born. The first person stands far behind you, deep in prehistory. Before writing, before farming, before cities, you are near the front of that line holding a number, and the number is enormous. Something close to 100 billion people were born before you drew your breath. That number feels like trivia. This video is about why it may be the most unsettling number attached to your existence, and why your place in that line might quietly predict how the human story ends. Want to be honest with you from the first minute. Nobody can hand you a date for the end of humanity. Nobody can show you a photograph of the last person in the line. What I can do is walk you through an argument that is simple to state, brutal to escape, and taken seriously by careful physicists and philosophers who would rather it were wrong. Some of what follows is arithmetic you can check. Some of it is probability that bends the mind. Some of it is disputed at the highest level. We'll keep those lines clear as we go. The thread holding everything together is one question asked with more precision than everyday language allows. If you are just an ordinary human, what does being ordinary tell you about the road ahead? If you have ever felt a strange fatigue when thinking about the far future, you already know the emotional weight here. We like to imagine humanity as a story in its opening chapters. We picture descendants spreading across the galaxy, a species barely getting started, a long dawn ahead of us. That picture feels like a floor under the whole project of being human. Remove the floor, and the mind reaches for something to hold. The argument we are about to meet does not prove the floor is gone. It asks a harder question. Why are you so sure you are standing at the beginning of the story rather than somewhere near its middle, or worse, near its end? There are two comfortable stories people tell about our future, and most of us carry both at once without noticing the contradiction. The first story says the future is open, unwritten, ours to shape. The second story says the future is basically guaranteed to be long, because look how far we have come. Both stories treat the coming ages as a vast, mostly empty room waiting to be filled with human life. Hold that image of the empty room, because the argument in this video does something strange to it. It does not argue that the room is empty or full. It argues that your own birth is a clue about the size of the room, and that you have been ignoring the clue your whole life. Start with how we naturally feel about our place in time. Almost everyone feels early. We feel like ancestors, not descendant. We look at ancient tools in a museum and sense the distance behind us. Then we look forward and sense open sky. That feeling is not stupid. Compared with a person from 10,000 years ago, we know staggeringly more. We live longer. We reach farther. It is natural to read that progress as a runway, as if the acceleration itself promises a long flight. The feeling of being early is one of the most universal feelings humans have about history, and it may be one of the least examined. On top of that feeling, we layer a story of expansion. We imagine the future the way an optimistic mapmaker imagines an unexplored coast. There will be more people, more centuries, more worlds. If humanity spreads beyond this planet, the numbers become dizzying. Trillions upon trillions of lives could still be ahead, spread across billions of years, until the stars themselves grow old. In that vision, the 100 billion who have already lived are a rounding error, a tiny seed at the base of an unimaginable tree. Under that story, you are not near the front of the line. You are almost at the very tip of the beginning, and the line stretches nearly forever ahead. That expansion story is emotionally powerful because it rescues meaning from mortality. If the species runs for billions of years, then our struggles are foundations. Our discoveries are gifts to countless heirs. Our names might echo. It also flatters the moment we happen to occupy. Every generation likes to believe it lives at a hinge of history, and the expansion story lets us feel both important and safe at the same time. Important because we are early builders, safe because the building will surely stand. It is a warm story. Warmth, though, is not evidence, and the argument we are approaching is cold in a very specific way. Notice the hidden assumption inside the warm story. It assumes that you, the specific person watching this, arrived at a special time. It assumes you are among the first few humans out of a total that will eventually reach into the trillions. Think about what that requires. If humanity is destined to produce, say, 100 trillion people across the coming ages, then being born among the first 100 billion makes you part of the earliest 0.1% of everyone who will ever live. You would be almost freakishly early. You would have won a kind of cosmic lottery of timing without buying a ticket. Maybe you did, but a careful thinker should at least pause and ask how likely that is. Science has trained us to distrust exactly this kind of specialness, at least when it comes to place. For most of history, humans assumed the Earth sat at the center of everything, with the heavens turning around us. Then Copernicus moved the Earth off the throne, and every step since has pushed us further from the center. Our planet orbits an ordinary star, in an ordinary arm of an ordinary galaxy, among trillions of galaxies. This habit of assuming we are not in a privileged spot has been one of the most reliable guides in the history of science. Whenever we assumed we were central, we were wrong. Whenever we assumed we were typical, we tended to be right. But here is the odd gap. We applied that humility to space and almost never to time. We accepted that our location in the universe is nothing special, while quietly assuming that our location in history is extremely special, that we happen to live near the very beginning of a near-infinite human story. The argument in this video is what happens when someone finally turns the Copernican mirror toward the calendar. It asks a simple, uncomfortable thing. What if you are not a special early human? What if you are just a typical one, drawn at random from the whole line, past and future together? Here is what changes everything. Imagine that all the humans who will ever live, from the first to the last, are lined up in birth order. And imagine your own birth as a random draw from that complete line. You did not choose to be born early or late. From this point of view, you are simply a sample, plucked without preference from the entire span of human existence. That single move, treating yourself as a random sample in time rather than a special witness at the dawn, is the whole engine of the argument. Everything strange that follows comes from taking that one idea seriously and refusing to flinch. If you are a random sample from the full line, then your position in it carries information. Random draw tends to land in the crowded middle of a distribution, not out at the lonely edges. Think of it plainly. If you reach into a bag of numbered tickets, you are far more likely to pull a ticket from the thick of the pile than to pull the very first or the very last. Applied to humanity, being a random human means you are probably not among the first tiny sliver of all humans who will ever live, and probably not among the last tiny sliver either. You are probably somewhere in the broad middle. And that innocent sentence has teeth, because remember your number. Something close to 100 billion people were born before you. If you are roughly in the middle of the entire human line, then the total number of humans who will ever live is not in the trillions upon trillion. It is closer to a couple of 100 billion, which means the number of humans still to come, from now until the very end, is not a near infinite ocean. It is roughly comparable to the number who already lived and died. The endless runway shrinks into a road with a visible horizon. That is the moment the warm story cracks. And it cracks not from any new fact about bombs or viruses or dying stars, but purely from taking your own ordinariness serious. You might reasonably wonder how anyone knows that head count at all, and the honest answer is that we know it only roughly. Demographers who try to add up every person ever born reach into deep uncertainty the further back they go. Since birth rates and infant survival in prehistory are estimates layered on estimates, the figures they publish range from around 60 billion at the low end to well over 100 billion at the high end. But notice something reassuring about the argument. It does not need the exact number. Whether you are the 60th billion human or the 120th billion, you are still enormously far from the first few million, and that is all the reasoning requires. The conclusion is stubborn, precisely because it survives our ignorance about the precise count. Your first instinct is almost certainly to resist. And you should. This reasoning feels like a trick, like pulling a rabbit from a hat made of definitions. How can my birthday tell me anything about the fate of the species? It not measure any threat. It not inspect any danger. only looked at a number attached to me. Surely the future depends on what humans actually do, on wars and cures and choices, not on where I happen to sit in a queue I never joined. Hold that objection tightly. We will come back to it, because it is the most important objection there is, and the argument does not survive unless it can answer it. It is worth naming the feeling underneath the resistance, because the feeling is doing more work than the logic. We do not merely disbelieve the conclusion, we resent it. It touches the same nerve that makes us feel our own lives are the main story rather than a line in a much longer book. Every one of us walks around quietly, certain of being the protagonist, born at the interesting part, watching from the best seat in history. The argument does not attack our courage or our worth. It attacks that quiet certainty of being central, and it does so with a tool we normally trust. That is why smart people become strangely emotional about it. It is not just a claim about the future, it is a claim about how ordinary you are, and almost no one wants to hear how ordinary they are. But before we test the objection, be precise about what random sample means here, because sloppiness at this step causes most of the confusion. The claim is not that some cosmic hand physically shuffled souls and dealt you into the 21st century. The claim is an assumption about reasoning, a rule for how to place yourself when you do not know your position in advance. The rule says this: when you have no special information telling you that you are unusual, you should reason as if you are a typical member of the relevant group. It is the same rule that tells you that if you wake in a hospital ward with no memory, you should guess you are in a common condition rather than a rare one. Typicality is the safe default, and that default is exactly the one we happily use everywhere, except when it points at our own extinction. We use it in polls, assuming a random voter represents the crowd. We use it in medicine, assuming a random patient reflects the population. We use it in physics, assuming our vantage point is not cosmically privileged. The Copernican habit is nothing more than typicality applied to location. The argument of this video is typicality applied to birth order. If you accept the habit in every other domain, the burden falls on you to explain why time, and only your own time, deserves an exception. That is the disquiet. And now we can meet the people who first put it into sharp form. The idea has several parents who arrived at it from different directions. The first careful version is usually credited to the physicist Brandon Carter, who raised it in the early 1980s while thinking about how the mere fact of our existence biases what we observe. Carter was cautious, and he introduced it almost as a warning about a subtle statistical trap rather than a doomsday prophecy. He noticed that any observer, simply by existing, is not a neutral measuring device. You can only find yourself in a time and place capable of producing you. And that fact quietly skews every estimate you make about how common or rare your kind of moment really is. The philosopher John Leslie took the seed from Carter and grew it into something the public could feel. In a book bluntly titled About the End of the World, Leslie laid out the reasoning in plain language and pushed it hard. His central move was to insist that we treat our own birth rank the way we would treat any other random draw, and then to follow the probability wherever it led. Leslie was not a prophet of gloom for its own sake. He was making a philosophical point about consistency. If you accept ordinary probabilistic reasoning about samples, he argued, you cannot simply switch it off the moment it produces a conclusion you dislike about your own species. Third parent, the astrophysicist Richard Gott, reached a similar destination by a cleaner road. Gott framed it around what he called the Copernican principle, the idea that there is nothing special about your position as an observer, including your position in time. He argued that if you encounter something at a random moment in its existence, you can estimate how long it will last. You are unlikely to have arrived in the very first instant of its life, and unlikely to have arrived in its very last instant. Most likely you have shown up somewhere in the vast middle stretch, and from that alone you can bracket its future. Gott loved to tell how he first tested this on the Berlin Wall. In the late 1960s, as a young man, he stood before that wall and reasoned that he was probably seeing it at no special time in its history. The wall had stood for a handful of years when he visited. Using his principle, he estimated a range for how much longer it would last. A range with a modest lower bound and a generous upper bound. Years later, the wall came down, and the moment of its fall fell comfortably inside the window he had sketched. It was a single case, not a proof, but it made the abstract feel concrete. The reasoning had touched the real world and not embarrassed itself. Let me put the method into words, because the arithmetic is gentler than it sounds. Suppose you observe something at a random point in its lifetime and you want a range you can state with 50% confidence. Gott's rule says its remaining future will fall between 1/3 of its current age and 3 times its current age. In other words, if a thing has already lasted a certain span, it will probably last at least 1/3 of that span more, and probably not more than 3 times that span more. That is the modest 50% version. It is not a crystal ball. It is a fence around the likely outcomes, built from a single assumption about not being special. If you want more confidence, the fence gets wider for 95% confidence. Gott's rule stretches the range so that the remaining future lies between 1/39th of the current age and 39 times the current age. The wider you want your certainty, the looser the bracket becomes, which is exactly how honest statistics should behave. Notice what this does and does not clone. It does not say the end arrives on a schedule. It says that extreme outcomes, arriving at the very birth or the very death of a thing, are rare by definition. So betting against them is usually wise, simple, almost too simple, which is why it provokes such fury. Gott did not stop at a wall. He applied the same reasoning to a batch of shows running on Broadway on a particular day, predicting how long each would keep playing based only on how long it had already run. When the results came in over the following years, the large majority of the shows closed within the ranges he had drawn. Again, this is not a law of nature. Plays are not atom, but it is a track record, and it shows the method is not pure sophistry. It captures something real about encountering ongoing processes at random moments, and humanity, from the point of view of any single person's birth, is exactly such a process encountered at a random moment. When Gott published this reasoning in a respected scientific journal in the early 1990s, the reaction was immediate and loud. Colleagues wrote in to accuse him of dressing up a fallacy in the robes of physics, and others wrote in to defend him with equal heat. Gott said the fire was not the Berlin Wall or the plays, which people found charming and harmless. What set the fire was the moment he turned the same lens on our own species and used it to bracket the future of humanity. The reasoning felt trivial when aimed at a curtain in a theater, and unbearable when aimed at us. That asymmetry in how people reacted is itself a clue. We do not object to the method, we object to where it points, when the subject is ourselves. Now apply it to us, but with a sharper tool than calendar years, when the question is, how many humans remain? The cleanest ruler is not time but people, counting by births rather than by centuries. You are, in round terms, somewhere near the 100 billionth human being. Treat that rank as a random draw from the complete sequence of all humans who will ever live. The reasoning then says you are unlikely to be in the earliest tiny fraction of that sequence. If you insist on 95% confidence, you conclude that you are probably not within the first small percent of everyone, which sets an upper bound on how many humans can still be coming after you. Run the numbers and the bound is sobering. If your rank near 100 billion is not to be freakishly early, then the total number of humans who will ever live is, with high confidence, not vastly larger than a couple of trillion at the extreme upper edge, and quite plausibly much less. Subtract the 100 billion or so who already lived, and the humans still to come are bounded, not boundless. The exact figure depends on assumptions we will pick apart, but the shape of the conclusion is stubborn. The number of people ahead of us is finite, and, by cosmic standards, not that large. The near-infinite tree of descendants was never entailed by anything except our hope. Translating that headcount into calendar time requires one more ingredient: the size of future generation. Here, the argument becomes genuinely double-edged, and honesty demands we say so. If the human population stays large, in the billions, then even a bounded total number of future humans gets used up quickly, and the horizon could be measured in centuries. If population instead falls sharply and stabilizes at a smaller level, the same bounded total could stretch across many thousands of years. The birth rank argument constrains the total count of people much more directly then it constrains the date. It tells you the crowd has a back wall. It is coy about exactly when you will reach it. There is a second, more rigorous way to feel the force of all this, and it is worth slowing down for, because it is where the argument stops looking like a parlor trick. Imagine two large urns sitting on a table. One urn contains 10 balls, numbered in order. The other urn contains 10 million balls, numbered in order. You do not know which urn is which. Someone lets you reach into one urn without telling you which, and you pull out a ball. You look at the number, it reads 7. Which urn do you think you drew from? The one with 10 balls, or the one with 10 million? Almost everyone feels the pull immediately. Number as low as 7 is entirely ordinary if you drew from the small urn, where every ball wears a low number. But drawing a 7 from the 10 million urn would be a wild fluke, a 1 in more than a million landing on the tiniest early sliver. So a low number is evidence, real Bayesian evidence, that you are holding a ball from the small urn. You have learned something about the size of the whole collection just by reading the number on your single ball. Nothing mystical happened, you simply updated toward the hypothesis that makes your observation ordinary rather than miraculous. Now feel the substitution. The balls are human. The number on your ball is your birth rank. The small urn is a future in which humanity ends relatively soon, producing a modest total of people. The large urn is a future in which humanity flourishes for ages, producing an astronomical total. Your birth rank, near 100 billion, is a low number in the sense that matters, because it would be a common draw in the small urn future and a staggering fluke in the vast urn future. So your very existence at the rank you occupy is evidence that tilts you, at least a little, toward the future where the human total is smaller. That tilt is the Doomsday Argument in its purest form. The assumption doing the heavy lifting here has a name. Philosophers call it the self-sampling assumption. Stated carefully, it says you should reason as though you were a randomly selected member from the set of all observers in your reference class. It is the formal version of do not assume you are special. Under this assumption, your birth rank behaves exactly like the number on the drawn ball, and the Bayesian update toward a smaller human total follows with mathematical inevitability. Reject the assumption, and much of the argument loosens. Accept it, and you have to accept the unwelcome conclusion or find a flaw elsewhere. This is why the debate has raged for decades among people who do this for a living. Want to be fair about the size of the effect, because sensational retellings exaggerate it. The Doomsday Argument does not, on its own, prove that the end is near or set any date. What it does is shift your probability. If, before considering your birth rank, you believed a long future and a short future were both plausible, the argument pushes weight toward the shorter one. How much weight depends on what you believed beforehand, on your prior. Someone who begins convinced that humanity will surely spread across the galaxy will end, after the update, merely less convinced. The argument is a lever, not a guillotine, but a lever aimed at your deepest assumption about the future is disturbing enough. It helps to see the update as a tug-of-war between two forces rather than a single verdict. On one side sits everything you already believe about human resilience, technology, and the sheer momentum of a species that has survived ice ages and plagues. On the other side sits the cold weight of your birth rank, pulling toward the future in which fewer humans follow. A strong prior can hold its ground against a modest tug. Weak or honest prior, one that admits we simply do not know, gets moved much further. This is why two thoughtful people can run the same argument and walk away with different levels of worry. They did not disagree about the mathematics. They arrived carrying different amounts of prior conviction, and the same lever moved them by different amounts. So what does the end even mean here? And this matters more than people expect. The argument counts humans, so its conclusion is about the end of humans, not necessarily the end of everything. One way the line stops is grim, through extinction, a catastrophe that leaves no one. But another way the line stops is stranger and not grim at all. Our descendants could change so much that they no longer count as human in the same reference class, becoming something we would not know how to name. In that case, the human line ends not in death but in transformation. and the different longer line begins that our birth rank says nothing about. The argument bounds humans. It does not bound whatever we might become. That escape hatch points straight at the deepest weakness of the whole framework. The problem of the reference class. The entire argument depends on deciding who counts as one of us, who belongs in the line you are randomly drawn from. Should the line include only anatomically modern humans, or also earlier ancestors who made tools and buried their dead? Should it include future beings with enhanced minds, or artificial descendants who remember being us? There is no obvious, principled place to draw the boundary, and the answer you choose changes the total and therefore the conclusion. The math is precise once the class is fixed. Fixing the class is not precise at all. Slide the boundary and watch the argument wobble. If you define the reference class narrowly, including only people much like you, then a nearby transformation into post-human descendants closes your particular line soon, and the doom reading looks almost trivially true, but also almost trivially harmless, since it predicts change rather than death. If you define the class broadly, sweeping in every mind that will ever descend from us, then your birth rank near 100 billion could indeed be freakishly early, and the argument reasserts its grim edge. The conclusion you extract depends on a decision the argument itself cannot make for you. Critics see this as the fatal crack. Defenders see it as a demand for care, not a refutation. There is a second serious objection, and it comes from a rival assumption that many find equally reasonable. It is called the self-indication assumption, and it works as a direct counterweight. The self-indication assumption says that, all else being equal, hypotheses which predict more observers should be considered more likely, precisely because they give more chances for someone like you to exist at all. Under this view, the vast future full of trillions of people is more probable to begin with, simply because it contains so many potential observers, and that boost, its defenders argue, exactly cancels the doomsday tilt from your low birth rank. The two effects meet in the middle and neutralize. The trouble is that the self-indication assumption drags its own monsters into the room. Taken seriously, it implies you should believe in whichever theory of the cosmos predicts the largest possible number of observers, even infinitely many, almost regardless of other evidence. Philosophers call this the presumptuous philosopher problem, because it lets someone deduce sweeping facts about the universe from an armchair just by noting that they exist. So we are left with two assumptions, each intuitive in isolation, each producing an absurdity somewhere. Choose the self-sampling assumption, and you face doomsday. Choose the self-indication assumption, and you face the presumptuous philosopher. There is no consensus on which poison to drink, and that unresolved fork is the honest heart of the whole subject. There is a clean little thought experiment that makes the fork you can feel with your hands. Imagine a hidden coin is flipped. On heads, a keeper creates just one person and places them in a room. On tails, the keeper creates 1,000 people and places each in an identical room. You wake up in one of these rooms with no memory of the flip, and someone asks you to bet on whether the coin came up heads or tails. The self-sampling assumption says the flip was fair, so you should call it even, since your existence was guaranteed either way, and tells you nothing. The self-indication assumption says you should bet heavily on tails, because a world with 1,000 people gave 1,000 times more chances for someone like you to be the one waking up. Sit with how strange both answers are, because that discomfort is the whole point. The even bet feels wrong to some people, who insist that finding yourself existing at all should favor the world with more residents. The tails bet feels wrong to others, who notice it lets you conjure knowledge about a coin you never saw, purely from the fact that you woke up. This tiny room, with its one person or its 1,000, is the doomsday argument in miniature. Heads is the short human future with few people. Tails is the vast future with trillions. Your own awakening is the only evidence you have, and depending on which assumption you trust, that same awakening either says nothing or says a great deal. This is also where the argument shakes hands with other famous puzzles you may already carry. It rhymes with the paradox that asks why, in a galaxy that should teem with life, we hear only silence. If technological civilizations reliably ended soon after arising, both the silence and our own suspicious birth rank would have the same root cause, a barrier that stops species from running long. That shared barrier is sometimes called the Great Filter, and the frightening version of it lies not in our past but in our future, waiting for every civilization that reaches roughly our stage. The Doomsday Argument does not prove such a filter exists, but it points a cold finger in the same direction the silence does. The two ideas reinforce each other in a way that should give anyone pause. If the filter lies behind us, in some fantastically unlikely step that life rarely takes, then we are rare survivors and the future could still be long, which would sit awkwardly with the doomsday tilt. If the filter lies ahead of us, in some trap that reliably destroys civilizations near our level of power, then the silence of the sky and the shortness implied by our birth rank tell one consistent, grim story. We cannot yet say which reading is right, because we have exactly one example of a civilization to study. And it is us. But when two independent lines of reasoning, one from the empty radio sky and one from your own birthday, both lean toward the same unsettling shape, the coincidence is hard to wave away as mere accident. It also touches the question of whether our world is a simulation, and the connection is not decoration. Both arguments spring from the same act of counting observers and asking which kind you are likely to be. The simulation argument says that if advanced civilizations run vast numbers of detailed simulations, then most beings who feel like us would be simulated rather than original. So you are probably one of the many. The Doomsday Argument says that if you are a typical human, your rank suggests few humans follow. They are two faces of one habit of mind, the habit of locating yourself among all the beings of your kind and letting the head count update your beliefs. Learn the habit once, and you see it everywhere. The philosopher who mapped this territory most carefully spent an entire book on what he called anthropic bias, the systematic way our conclusions get bent by the fact that only certain observers exist to draw them. His deepest contribution was to show that the reference class problem is not a footnote, but the whole game. He proposed that perhaps we should not count whole lives at all, but moments of experience, the individual observer moments that make up a conscious life. Under that finer counting, the sums change again, and some versions of the doomsday tilt weaken while new puzzles appear. The lesson is humbling. There may be no single correct way to slice the population of observers, and every way of slicing it delivers a slightly different verdict about your future. What survives all this slicing is not a number but a discipline, a refusal to exempt yourself from the statistics you apply to everything else. That discipline is uncomfortable, precisely because it works. When you use it on distant galaxies, it keeps you honest, and it has never failed. When you use it on your own birth, the very same move that made you a good scientist about space turned you into a nervous witness about time. You cannot keep the tool for the parts of reality that flatter you and drop it for the parts that frighten you. Either typicality is a guide or it is not. The argument simply asks you to be consistent, and consistency, in this one case, has a cost that most people are unwilling to pay. There is a further wrinkle, and it is the one that most often trips up both critics and fans, so hold it gently. Human population did not grow steadily. It exploded. Because of that explosion, a huge share of all the people who have ever lived were born relatively recently, within the last several centuries. This means that being born into a crowded recent era is not surprising at all, even under a long future, simply because recent eras contain so many people. That fact complicates the clean line argument, and some thinkers believe it softens the doomsday tilt considerably, while others insist the core update survives once the mathematics is done carefully. The disagreement is technical, and it is genuine. Even so, the population explosion cuts in an eerie direction when you sit with it. If almost everyone who ever lived is alive in a brief, dense window near a peak, then that peak is by construction a strange and precarious place to be. Peaks are not stable states. Curve that rises that fast either keeps rising into something we cannot picture, or Your presence in the crowded window does not by itself say which, but it does say you are living at an unusual, high-pressure moment in the human story. Not in the calm, long plateau we like to imagine stretching ahead. The ordinary reading of your own era is that it is anything but ordinary. None of this requires naming a specific catastrophe, and I want to keep the argument clean of easy alarmism, because its power is that it needs no particular villain. It does not depend on any single threat, on weapons or plagues or a warming world or runaway machine. It is an argument from your position, not from any headline. That is what makes it so slippery to dismiss. You can refute a specific prediction about a specific danger by managing that danger. You cannot refute your own birth rank by passing a law. The argument sits underneath the news, indifferent to which particular door the ending might come through, insisting only that some door is closer than we assumed. Let me now give the strongest objection its full day in court, the one that has convinced many brilliant people. The whole thing is a fallacy. Picture a caveman tens of thousands of years ago, running the exact same reasoning. He notes his own birth rank, treats himself as a typical human, and concludes that few humans will follow him. He would have been catastrophically wrong. Billions upon billions came after him. If the method fails so badly for him, why should we trust it for us? Any argument that would have deceived every ancestor who tried it looks less like a discovery and more like a permanent illusion baked into the way self-location plays tricks on the mind. The defenders have a reply, and whether it satisfies, we may decide where you land. They point out that the caveman was, in fact, in an extremely early and therefore extremely rare position, exactly the kind of position the argument says is improbable to occupy. Most humans are not cavemen, precisely because so few humans lived in those sparse early ages. So when the caveman guessed he was typical, he was making the one guess the argument itself flags as unlikely to be correct, and unlikely guesses fail. You, holding a rank near 100 billion, are in a far more crowded and typical stretch of the line. The method is not claiming to be right every time. It is claiming to be right most of the time, and most of the people who ever run it will indeed be in the middle, not at the dawn. That reply reframes what the argument is and is not. It was never a prophecy, and treating it as one is the surest way to misunderstand it. It is a probability update, a rule for adjusting your confidence in the face of one peculiar piece of data, the data of your own existence at a particular rank. It does not say the end is certain. It does not say the end is soon in years. It says that if you were quietly assuming a near infinite human future, that assumption is on weaker ground than you thought, because your own ordinariness is evidence against it. It replaces a comfortable certainty with an uncomfortable probability, and probabilities are all we ever really have about the future. There is a subtler objection that many find the most convincing of all, and it strikes at whether the lottery is real. The complaint runs like this: you could not have been born as a person 10,000 years in the future, because that person would have different parents, a different body, a different life, and so would simply not be you. There was never a moment when your soul waited in a hat to be drawn into some century. You were always going to be born exactly when you were born. So calling it a random sample is a fiction laid over a fixed fact. If nothing was ever actually sampled, the critic says, then reading your birth rank as a draw is a category mistake. However elegant the mathematics looks afterward, the defenders answer that the sampling was never meant to be a physical event, only a stance you adopt when you are ignorant of your own position. You do know your birth rank now, but the argument asks what you should have expected about it before you learned it, reasoning as any observer would from behind a veil. That move is the same one we accept without complaint in countless ordinary cases. Whenever we treat ourselves as an unremarkable instance of a larger group, whether that stance is legitimate when the group spans all of time and includes people who do not yet exist, is exactly the point still under dispute. The objection does not obviously win. It does obviously refuse to go away. Plenty of serious people still reject it, and their reasons deserve respect rather than caricature. Some argue that you cannot treat your birth as a random draw at all, because you could not have been born at any other time and remained you, so there was never a real lottery to sample from. Some argue that the reference class problem is not a wrinkle but a fatal wound, Since the answer depends entirely on an ungrounded choice, some argue that the self-indication assumption is the more defensible rule and quietly dissolves the whole effect. These are not lazy dismissals. They are careful attempts to find the exact spot where the reasoning smuggles in more than it earns. And the debate remains open, and yet the argument refuses to die, which tells you something. It has survived decades of assault by people motivated to bury it, and no objection has won universal agreement. A proposed escape route seems to trade the doomsday conclusion for some other strangeness, as if the weirdness is conserved and can only be moved, never removed. That persistence is itself a kind of evidence, not that the conclusion is true, but that the question is real and not a mere confusion of language. When a simple argument resists refutation this long, the honest response is neither panic nor mockery. It is sustained, careful attention. The same attention we give to any deep problem that will not resolve. Part of the difficulty is that the plain question, "Are we near the end?" secretly braids together several different questions that need untangling. One question is factual, about specific risks and how likely they are to end us this century. Another is statistical, about what your birth rank alone can imply. Third is philosophical, about which assumption governs reasoning from your own existence. The Doomsday Argument speaks mainly to the second and third, and barely at all to the first. Mixing them produces the worst conversations, where someone answers a probability puzzle by listing safety measures, or answers a philosophical fork by citing a news story. Keep them separate, and each becomes clearer, though none becomes comfortable. Suppose, for a moment, that you take the argument seriously without letting it crush you. What should change? The most reasonable response is not despair, but attention. The kind of attention that treats the long future as fragile rather than guarantee. If the coming ages are not a boundless certainty, but a finite possibility we could lose, then the choices that lower the risk of an early ending gain enormous weight. Protecting the species stops being an abstract virtue and becomes the difference between a short line and a long one. In that sense, the argument can be read not as a sentence but as a warning shot, a reason to take seriously the idea that we might be a rare and precious thing that has to earn its future rather than inherit it. There is even a strange consolation buried in the reasoning. If you look for it, the same logic that makes a vast future improbable also makes that vast future precious beyond measure, precisely because it is not owed to us. Future that arrives automatically asks nothing of anyone. Future that hangs by the thread of our own choices turns every act of foresight into something that matters. The argument does not tell you to give up. If anything, it tells you that the story is not on rails, that the long human future is a prize rather than a promise, and that the people alive at the crowded, dangerous peak are exactly the ones whose decisions could tip the line toward its longer or its shorter ending. There is a final humility worth naming about the whole enterprise of reasoning from our own existence. This style of thinking, weighing what your presence as an observer implies about the wider world, is genuinely young and genuinely treacherous. It has produced insights and it has produced nonsense. Sometimes in the same paper, we are trying to use a single data point, the fact that we are here, to constrain enormous questions, and a single data point is a thin thread to hang a species on. The right posture is not to worship the argument as prophecy, or to wave it away as a trick. It is to hold it the way you hold any powerful, unfinished idea, with both hands and with caution. So let us carry the original question back to the line where we found it. Are you more likely living near the end of humanity? If you demand a yes or a no, the honest answer is that nobody can give you one. If you ask instead what your own existence, taken as ordinary, quietly implies, then the answer is less comforting than the stories we tell. It implies that the near infinite future we'll imagine is an assumption, not a fact, and that the assumption is in tension with the plainest thing about you, which is that you are not special. The road ahead is finite in a way our hopes rarely admit, and your place in the line is a small, cold clue to its length. Will not close by pretending the options are equally strong. Your ordinariness is not optional. It is the most reliable fact you possess about yourself, the one that has never once let us down when applied to space. The various escape routes, the reference class fixes, and the rival assumptions are alive and serious. but none has closed the case. If you need a way to hold all this without dread, then rank your beliefs by confidence rather than by comfort. Place your ordinariness first. Place the argument's logic second. Respected but not worshipped. Place the specific fear of any particular ending last, because that part the argument never actually claimed to know. We began with you standing unnoticed in a line that reaches from the first human to the last, holding a number near 100 billion. We'll end with that number transformed from trivia into a question you can no longer fully close. Maybe you are an early ancestor after all, freakishly, luckily early, and the line runs on for ages. Maybe you are exactly where the mathematics gently suggests, somewhere in the crowded middle, with the back wall nearer than the warm stories allow. We have no way to know for certain, and certainty was never on offer. What the argument gives you instead is a sharper kind of attention, a refusal to assume the future is long just because we would like it to be. Choose your assumptions on purpose, then the mystery stays honest. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey through the cosmic mysteries, and until next time, keep looking up.